The headphones pressed tight against Tommy Fletcher's ears as he sat hunched over the radio equipment. Static crackled and hissed through the speakers like angry whispers from the deep Atlantic Ocean. His fingers adjusted the dial slowly, carefully listening for anything unusual in the sea of noise. Outside the cramped radio room of HMS Wanderer, the North Atlantic stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and restless under the March 1942 sky. Tommy was only 19 years old, but he already knew the sound of death. It came through radio waves as German voices speaking in short, clipped sentences. It came as explosions that shook the entire ship. It came as screams from men drowning in freezing water covered with burning oil. He had heard all of these sounds too many times in the past 6 months. The convoy stretched across miles of ocean. 40 merchant ships carrying food, weapons, ammunition, and fuel for Britain. The island nation was starving and desperate. German submarines called U-boats were sinking supply ships faster than they could be replaced. Every convoy that made it across the Atlantic meant Britain could keep fighting for another month. Every convoy that failed meant more people would go hungry, more factories would close, more hope would die. Commander James Hartley stood on the bridge of HMS Wanderer, binoculars pressed to his eyes. His gray hair was wet from sea spray, and deep lines creased his weathered face. He had been fighting this war since 1939, and every month it got worse. The German U-boats hunted in groups called wolf packs. They would surround a convoy and attack from multiple directions at once. The escorts tried to protect the merchant ships, but it was like trying to guard sheep from wolves that could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish beneath the waves. Hartley had lost 3 convoys in the past 4 months. Hundreds of men died under his protection. He could still hear their voices calling for help over the radio before the cold Atlantic water silenced them forever. The nightmares kept him awake most nights. He would pace the bridge, searching the dark horizon, knowing the enemy was out there somewhere, watching and waiting. Tommy's hand suddenly froze on the dial. A voice cut through the static. German words, fast and efficient. He grabbed his pencil and wrote down the time. 2,300 hours. The transmission lasted only 15 seconds, then vanished. Tommy felt his heart pounding. Somewhere out there, probably within 50 miles, a German U-boat had just surfaced to send a message. But where? Which direction? There was no way to know. The ocean was too vast, and the radio signal could come from anywhere. That he picked up the telephone that connected to the bridge. Commander Hartley answered immediately. Tommy reported the German transmission. Hartley thanked him and hung up. Both men knew what it meant. The wolf pack was gathering. Soon they would attack. The first torpedo struck at midnight. The merchant ship SS Empire Progress took the hit on her port side. The explosion lit up the night like a terrible sunrise. Metal screamed as it tore apart. Water rushed into the dying ship. Men scrambled for lifeboats, but the vessel was sinking too fast. Within 6 minutes, the Empire Progress slipped beneath the waves, taking 32 men with her. Tommy heard the distress call. His hand shook as he logged the information. Another ship gone. More men dead. He wanted to run outside to do something, but his job was here, listening to the radio, hoping to catch some signal that might help them fight back. The convoy changed course, trying to escape. The escort ships dropped depth charges, sending patterns of underwater explosions across the area where they thought the U-boat might be hiding. The ocean erupted with massive columns of white water. But they were guessing, shooting blindly into the darkness. The U-boat could be anywhere. 2 hours later, another torpedo. This time it was the tanker SS Olynthus carrying fuel oil. The explosion was enormous. Fire spread across the water like liquid hell. Men jumped from the burning ship and swam through flames. Their screams carried across the waves. The escorts pulled survivors from the water, but many were too badly burned to survive. Tommy heard their cries through the open door of the radio room. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the sounds followed him anyway. Commander Hartley stood rigid on the bridge, watching his convoy die. This was the worst part of command, making decisions that sent men to their deaths. Should they zigzag and slow down? Should they speed up and leave the burning ships behind? Every choice cost lives. He gave the order to maintain course and speed. They had to keep moving. Stopping would only make them easier targets. By dawn, 3 ships were gone. 140 men were dead or missing. The survivors crowded onto the escort vessels, wrapped in blankets, shivering from cold and shock. Tommy finally left the radio room when his replacement arrived. He walked out onto the deck and looked at the empty ocean. Somewhere beneath those cold gray waves, the U-boats were still there, following them, waiting for another chance to strike. That a young sailor stood next to him at the rail. His name was Davies, and he had been on one of the torpedoed ships. He had watched his friends die in the water. His eyes were empty, like he had seen something that could never be unseen. Tommy wanted to say something comforting, but there were no words that could help. They both knew the truth. This was war. This was the Battle of the Atlantic. And right now, the U-boats were winning. Commander Hartley gathered his officers in the wardroom that morning. They stood around a table covered with charts and reports. Hartley looked at each man's face and saw the same exhaustion and frustration he felt. They were fighting an invisible enemy with weapons that barely worked. The Aztec sonar could sometimes detect submarines underwater, but only at close range. By the time they found a U-boat, it had usually already attacked and escaped. Something had to change. They needed a way to find the U-boats before they struck. They needed to turn the hunters into the hunted. But how could they fight an enemy they could not see? Hartley stared at the map, showing the positions where ships had been sunk. There had to be a pattern. There had to be a way. Tommy returned to the radio room for his next shift. He put on the headphones and adjusted the equipment. Static filled his ears again. Somewhere in that noise, the German voices were talking, planning their next attack, coordinating their wolf pack. If only there was a way to find them from their radio signals. If only they could turn those German transmissions into targets instead of just warnings. The convoy sailed on through the gray Atlantic morning. The merchant ships maintained their tight formation. The escorts circled around them like protective dogs around a flock. And beneath the waves, invisible and patient, the wolf pack followed. The next attack would come soon. It always did. The question was not if more ships would die, but when. And how many men would go down with them into the dark, cold depths where no light ever reached and no help could ever come. Tommy listened to the static and waited. The warehouse in Liverpool Naval Base smelled of oil, salt water, and fresh paint. Tommy Fletcher stood in the doorway staring at something he had never seen before. A collection of strange equipment filled the center of the room. Metal boxes with dials and switches. Antennas pointing in different directions. Wires running everywhere like mechanical spiderwebs. Engineers in civilian clothes worked on the equipment, while naval officers watched closely. 2 weeks had passed since the convoy massacre. HMS Wanderer had limped back to port for repairs and resupply. Tommy had spent those weeks trying to forget the screams of drowning men. He had failed. The sounds followed him in his sleep every night. Now he stood looking at this mysterious equipment, wondering what it was and why he had been ordered to report here. A woman in WRNS uniform approached him. She was about his age, maybe 20, with dark hair pulled back tight and intelligent eyes that studied him carefully. Her uniform was crisp and perfect despite the dusty warehouse. She carried herself with confidence that made Tommy suddenly aware of how tired and rumpled he looked. "You must be Fletcher," she said. Her accent was educated, London, but with something else underneath. "I am Lieutenant Sarachen. We'll be working together on the new detection equipment." Tommy saluted awkwardly. He had never served with women officers before. The Women's Royal Naval Service had only recently been allowed on combat vessels for technical duties. Some of the old sailors grumbled about it, but Tommy did not care. If she could help him fight U-boats, she could have his job for all he cared. "What is this thing?" Tommy asked, pointing at the equipment. "High-frequency direction finding," Sarah said. "We call Huff-Duff. It's going to change everything." An older man emerged from behind the equipment. He wore a civilian suit that had seen better days, and his gray hair stuck up in all directions like he had been running his hands through it. This was Professor Edmund Harris, one of the scientists who had developed the system. His eyes had the distant look of someone who saw the world in radio waves and mathematical equations rather than ships and water. "Gather around," Harris said in a voice that expected to be obeyed. Several radio men joined Tommy and Sarah in a semicircle around the equipment. "What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest level. You will not discuss this with anyone outside this room. Not your friends, not your families, not even other crew members who are not cleared for this project. Lives depend on your silence." He paused to let that sink in, then continued. "The Germans communicate with their U-boats using radio signals. When a submarine surfaces to send a message, it transmits on high-frequency bands. Those radio signals travel in straight lines, just like light. This equipment can detect those signals and calculate exactly which direction they came from." Tommy felt his pulse quicken. If they could tell which direction a radio signal came from, they could find the U-boat. But Harris was not finished. "One direction finder tells you the U-boat is somewhere along a line." Harris drew an imaginary line in the air with his finger. "But if you have two ships with direction finders, both detecting the same transmission, you get two lines. And where those two lines cross." He clapped his hands together. "That's exactly where the U-boat is located. We call this triangulation." Sarah stepped forward and pointed to a map on the wall. It showed the Atlantic Ocean with several ship positions marked. "In practice, it works like this. A U-boat surfaces and transmits for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Our operator here detects it and gets a bearing, say 287 degrees. Another escort ship 40 miles away also detects it and gets a bearing of 134 degrees. We plot those two lines on the chart, and where they intersect is the U-boat's position, accurate to within a few miles." "And it works?" Tommy asked. "This has actually caught U-boats." "In testing, yes," Harris said. "In combat, we're about to find out. Your ship HMS Wanderer is receiving the first operational installation. 4 other escorts in your group are also being fitted. Within 2 weeks, you'll have a network of direction finders covering your entire convoy." Tommy looked at the equipment with new eyes. This could actually work. Every time a U-boat sent a message to coordinate with its wolf pack, every time it reported a convoy position to headquarters, every time it transmitted anything at all, this equipment would expose its location. The invisible hunters would become visible targets. Chief Petty Officer McGee, known to everyone as Sparks, spat tobacco juice into a cup and scowled at the equipment. He was 52 years old and had been a Navy radio man since before Tommy was born. He had no trust for fancy new gadgets. "Looks complicated," Sparks said. "What happens when it breaks down in a storm? What happens when salt water gets into all those delicate circuits? I'll stick with my ears and experience. Thank you very much." "Your ears and experience have let the U-boats sink 300 ships in the past 3 months," Sarah said quietly. There was no insult in her voice, just hard fact. "This equipment works. We've tested it in all weather conditions. Yes, it's complex. Yes, it requires training. But it works. And right now, working is all that matters." Sparks glared at her, but said nothing. He knew she was right. The old ways were not working. Men were dying. Ships were sinking. Britain was losing the battle of the Atlantic. Something had to change. For the next 10 days, Tommy and Sarah trained together. The equipment was installed in a specially built room on HMS Wanderer, next to the regular radio room. They learned how to operate the direction finder, how to read the oscilloscope displays, how to calculate bearings, and plot them on charts. Sarah was brilliant with the mathematics, able to do the triangulation calculations in seconds. Tommy had the better hearing, able to pick out faint German transmissions through heavy static. They made a good team. Sarah taught Tommy the technical details. Tommy taught Sarah the practical realities of working on a ship in combat. She learned to brace herself against the roll of the vessel while taking readings. He learned to trust the instruments even when his instincts said otherwise. Commander Hartley visited the Huff-Duff room on the last day before they sailed. He studied the equipment carefully, asking detailed questions. Sarah and Tommy demonstrated how the system worked, showing him practice bearings and calculations. Hartley said nothing for a long moment, just stared at the equipment like it might disappear if he looked away. "How quickly can you get a position after detecting a transmission?" he asked finally. 30 seconds if we're ready, Sarah said. 2 minutes if we need to verify with other ships. The U-boats transmit for 10 to 15 seconds, Hartley said. Sometimes less. That's enough, Tommy said. We only need a few seconds to get the bearing. The rest is mathematics. Hartley nodded slowly. For the first time in months, something like hope appeared in his tired eyes. Gentlemen, Lieutenant Shun, we sail tomorrow with convoy HX 230. 38 merchant ships carrying tanks, aircraft, ammunition, and food. The wolf packs will be waiting for us. They always are. But this time, maybe we'll see them first. That night, Tommy lay in his bunk staring at the metal ceiling. Tomorrow they would find out if the new equipment really worked. Tomorrow they would discover if radio waves could defeat the wolf packs. Tomorrow the hunters might become the hunted. He thought about the men who had died in the last convoy. The screams, the burning water, the empty ocean at dawn. Maybe now those deaths would mean something. Maybe now they could fight back. Sarah Chun sat at the desk in her tiny cabin, checking her calculations one more time. The mathematics were perfect. The equipment was ready. The theory was sound. But theory and combat were different things. Tomorrow she would find out if the classroom training could survive contact with real war. She said a quiet prayer for the men on those merchant ships, and for herself, and for everyone who would sail into danger when the sun rose over Liverpool's gray harbor. HS Wanderer left port at dawn, joining the convoy formation. The Huff-Duff equipment hummed quietly in its special room, ready and waiting. Somewhere ahead in the vast Atlantic, the wolf pack was gathering. The most important test was about to begin. The green glow of the oscilloscope lit Sarah Chen's face as she stared at the screen. Tommy Fletcher sat beside her, headphones pressed tight against his ears, his hand resting on the direction finder dial. The Huff-Duff room was dark except for the equipment lights. Outside, the North Atlantic night was black as coal. The convoy moved through the water like a herd of slow, vulnerable animals crossing a plain full of predators. It was April 1942, 6 days into the crossing. So far, the voyage had been quiet. Too quiet. Commander Hartley knew that silence meant nothing. The wolf pack was out there somewhere. The question was not if they would attack, but when. Every hour that passed without incident made everyone more nervous, not less. Tommy adjusted the dial slightly, scanning through frequencies. Static hissed and crackled in his ears. Sarah watched the oscilloscope trace its green line across the screen, steady and flat. Nothing. Just the endless noise of the Atlantic. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 0 to 100 hours. The middle watch. The time when men were most tired, when mistakes happened, when U-boats preferred to strike. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Weber stood on the conning tower of U-553, breathing the cold night air. His submarine had been stalking this convoy for 2 days, staying just over the horizon, following by periscope observations during the day and surface tracking at night. Now his wolf pack was in position. 3 other U-boats surrounded the convoy. It was time to coordinate the attack. Radio room ready. Weber called down the hatch. Ready, her captain, came the reply. Weber checked his watch. 0 to 100 hours exactly. Time to send the message. The signal would be brief, only 12 seconds. Just enough time to transmit the attack coordinates to the other U-boats. Then they would dive and begin the hunt. By dawn, half this convoy would be on the bottom of the ocean. Transmit, Weber ordered. In the radio room of U-553, young Franz Becker pressed the transmission key. The powerful radio sent its signal racing across the Atlantic at the speed of light. 12 seconds of Morse code carrying death sentences for merchant sailors. Tommy's eyes went wide. A spike appeared on Sarah's oscilloscope, sharp and sudden. The green line jumped like a startled animal. Tommy's hand moved instantly, locking the direction finder on the signal. Numbers appeared on the dial. 287 degrees. His other hand grabbed the stopwatch, timing the transmission. The German Morse code rattled through his headphones, fast and professional. Contact, Tommy said, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. German transmission, bearing 287 degrees. Sarah was already marking the time and bearing on the chart. Her hands moved with practice speed. The transmission continued. 8 seconds. 9 seconds. 10 seconds. Tommy copied down the Morse code, even though he could not read German. Intelligence would want to see it later. The transmission ended. 12 seconds total. Sarah grabbed the telephone connecting to the bridge. Commander Hartley answered before the first ring finished. Huff-Duff contact, Sarah reported. U-boat transmission detected, bearing 287 degrees from our position. Transmission duration 12 seconds. Acknowledged, Hartley said. His voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath. Stand by. On the bridge, Hartley was already at the radio, speaking to the other escorts. HMS Achates was 41 miles southeast of Wanderer's position. Her Huff-Duff operator had also caught the transmission. The bearing from Achates was 134 degrees. Hartley spread the chart on the navigation table. He drew a line from Wanderer's position at 287 degrees. He drew another line from Achates' position at 134 degrees. The two lines crossed. Where they intersected, a U-boat was sitting on the surface, probably still retracting its antenna, thinking it was safe in the darkness. Target position confirmed, Hartley said. Range 12 miles, bearing 290. All ships, commence attack run. Maximum speed. HMS Wanderer's engines roared to full power. The escort destroyer leaned forward as it accelerated, its bow cutting through the black water. HMS Achates was racing in from the southeast. Two other escorts changed course to support. For the first time in this war, they knew exactly where the enemy was hiding. For the first time, they were the hunters, not the prey. On you. 5:53, Franz Becker had just finished retracting the radio antenna when the intercom crackled. Radar warning. Multiple contacts closing fast. Weber's blood went cold. That was impossible. They were 12 miles from the convoy. The British Aztec sonar could not detect them at this range. There was no radar in the area. How could the escorts know where they were? Crash dive. Weber shouted. Emergency dive. All ahead full. U-553's crew exploded into action. Men ran to their positions. Valves opened with hisses of compressed air. Water flooded into the ballast tanks. The submarine's nose tilted downward. The deck became a steep slope as U-553 plunged toward the safety of the deep water, but they were too late. The escorts had covered half the distance already. Tommy and Sarah tracked a second transmission as U-553 sent an emergency warning to the other Wolfpack members. This transmission was only 4 seconds long, panicked and abbreviated. It gave them an updated bearing. The U-boat was trying to run. HMS Wanderer arrived at the calculated position 6 minutes after the initial detection. Commander Hartley ordered depth charges set for different depths. The charges rolled off the stern in a careful pattern. They sank through the dark water, counting down their preset detonators. The explosions came in a rolling sequence. Massive columns of white water erupted from the ocean. The blast waves traveled through the water at incredible speed, carrying crushing force. Inside U-553, the crew felt the first explosion hit like a giant hammer. The lights flickered. Men grabbed onto anything solid. The second explosion was closer. Metal groaned. Cork insulation fell from the ceiling in clouds of dust. Damage report. Weber shouted over the chaos. Reports came in from all compartments. Port hydroplane damaged. Battery compartment taking water. Main ballast tank 3 ruptured. The submarine was hurt but still alive. Weber ordered maximum depth and silent running. U-553 limped away into the darkness below, trailing oil and leaving a telltale wake of bubbles. HMS Achates detected the oil trail and dropped more charges. The water erupted again and again. But U-553 was deep now, running at emergency speed despite the damage. The depth charges exploded above and around it, but could not find the mark. After 40 minutes of punishment, Weber finally escaped. But his submarine was so badly damaged it could not continue the patrol. He had no choice but to break off and head for the French coast, limping home with his tail between his legs. The other 3 U-boats in the Wolfpack received U-553's warning. They did not understand what had happened, but they knew the British had somehow found Weber immediately after his radio transmission. The Wolfpack scattered. The attack was canceled. The convoy sailed on through the night. Unharmed in the Huff-Duff room, Tommy and Sarah sat back and let out long breaths they had not realized they were holding. They had done it. The system worked. They had detected a U-boat, calculated its position, and guided the escorts to it, all within minutes. The U-boat had escaped, but barely, and only because it was already damaged beyond combat capability. Commander Hartley came down to the Huff-Duff room an hour later. His face was tired, but his eyes were bright. Well done, both of you. That U-boat won't be sinking any ships for a long time. Maybe never again. Did we get him, sir? Tommy asked. No confirmed kill, Hartley admitted, but heavy damage. Oil trail suggests ruptured tanks. He's running for home. That's one less U-boat hunting our convoys. He paused and looked at the equipment with something like wonder. It really works. By God, it actually works. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Yes, sir. It works. The convoy reached Britain 8 days later. Not a single ship was lost. Word spread quietly through the Naval Intelligence Network. Huff-Duff had scored its first success. The equipment was rushed onto more escort vessels. Training programs expanded. Within weeks, dozens of ships would carry the device. Within months, hundreds. The Battle of the Atlantic was about to change. The U-boats just did not know it yet. They were still transmitting their radio messages, coordinating their wolf packs, reporting convoy positions to headquarters. And every single transmission was now a death sentence, a beacon showing the Allied escorts exactly where to find them. The hunters had become the hunted. The invisible had become visible, and the tide of the war was turning. The operations room in the German U-boat headquarters at Lorient, France was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Admiral Karl Donitz stood before a massive wall map of the North Atlantic. Red pins marked the last known positions of his wolf packs. Black pins marked where U-boats had been lost. There were too many black pins. Far too many. It was June 1942, 2 months after the first Huff-Duff success. Donitz was the commander of all German submarine forces, the man responsible for strangling Britain's supply lines and winning the Battle of the Atlantic. He had built the U-boat fleet from nothing into a weapon that brought the British Empire to its knees. His Wolfpack tactics had sunk millions of tons of Allied shipping. But something had changed. Something was wrong. Explain these losses, Donitz said to his staff officers. His voice was cold and controlled, but everyone in the room could feel the anger underneath. An intelligence officer stepped forward with a sheaf of reports. In March, we lost 8 U-boats. In April, 13. In May, 17. This month, we have already lost 12, and it is only the 20th. Causes? Donitz demanded. Aircraft attack accounts for 30%. Escort surface action accounts for 65%. The remaining 5% are unknown, possibly mines or mechanical failure. Donitz studied the map. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. U-boats were being attacked immediately after transmitting radio messages. Not hours later. Not days later. Immediately. As if the British could somehow see the radio signals themselves. They have a new detection system, Donitz said. Something that finds our boats when they transmit. His staff officers exchanged nervous glances. One of them spoke carefully. Sir, radio signals cannot be detected at long range. Our technical experts assure us that radio direction finding requires complex equipment and can only work at very close distances. The British could not possibly have such systems installed on every escort ship. And yet the boats keep dying, Donitz said. He picked up a report from his desk. U-Boat 3, Klaus Weber. Attacked within minutes of transmitting his Wolfpack coordination message. U-432 attacked immediately after reporting convoy position to headquarters. U-251 sunk 10 minutes after broadcasting weather report. The pattern is undeniable. On the other side of the Atlantic, that pattern was exactly what the Allied convoy escorts were counting on. Tommy Fletcher and Sarah Chun had become experts at their deadly trade. They could identify a U-boat transmission from the first burst of Morse code. Their fingers moved across the equipment controls without conscious thought. They could calculate bearings and plot positions faster than most people could tie their shoes. HMS Wanderer had detected and helped destroy 5 U-boats in 2 months. Sarah kept a notebook with careful records of every detection, every attack, every result. The numbers told a story of technological advantage turning into military victory. In March 1942, before Huff-Duff became widespread, German U-boats sank 95 merchant ships. In April, with Huff-Duff on 50 escort vessels, the number dropped to 74. In May, with 200 escorts equipped, only 62 merchant ships were lost. But the real change was in U-boat losses. Before Huff-Duff, Germany lost an average of 5 U-boats per month. Now, they were losing 20. The wolf packs were being slaughtered. Every time they tried to coordinate an attack, every time they reported their positions, every time they asked for instructions, the Huff-Duff network found them and sent the escorts racing to their positions. Commander Hartley stood in the convoy conference room at Liverpool, addressing a group of new escort captains. Maps and charts covered every wall. Models of U-boats sat on tables. Hartley had aged 10 years in the past 6 months, but now there was confidence in his voice that had not been there before. The U-boats must communicate, Hartley explained. They cannot coordinate wolf pack attacks without radio messages. They cannot report convoy positions to headquarters without transmitting. They cannot even navigate properly without receiving headquarters instructions. This is their weakness. Every transmission is a beacon that shows us exactly where they are. A young captain raised his hand. What if they stopped transmitting? Use radio silence. They tried that in May, Hartley said. For 2 weeks, very few transmissions. You know what happened? Their attacks became uncoordinated. Their wolf packs fell apart. Individual U-boats, wandering alone, are much easier to deal with than organized groups. They need to communicate to be effective. And when they communicate, we kill them. The numbers supported this brutal logic. In the 2 weeks of German radio silence, only 8 merchant ships were sunk, but 3 U-boats were still destroyed by random patrols and aircraft. The Germans could not win by staying silent. They could not win by transmitting. They were caught in an impossible situation. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Weber sat in the officer's mess of the submarine repair facility at Brest, France. His boat U-553 was still being repaired from the damage it took in April. The dock workers said it would be another month before she could sail. Weber was not sorry about the delay. Every boat that went out these days came back damaged or did not come back at all. That he met with other U-boat commanders who had survived recent patrols. They gathered in quiet corners and spoke in low voices about the mystery that was killing them. All of them had the same story. Transmit a message, get attacked within minutes. One commander reported sending a 4-second transmission and being depth-charged 2 minutes later. 4 seconds. How could the British respond so quickly? They have spies. One commander insisted. Someone is reading our codes. No, another said. It happens too fast for code breaking. This is something else. Some kind of detection equipment. Weber nodded slowly. Direction finding. It must be. They're using radio direction finders to locate us from our transmissions. Impossible, the first commander said. Those systems require huge antennas and careful calibration. They cannot work from a moving ship in a storm. Then explain how they find us, Weber said quietly. Explain the pattern. Explain why boats die within minutes of transmitting. No one could explain it, but they all knew it was real. The Atlantic had become a death trap. The hunters were being hunted. The U-boats were no longer the wolves. They were the prey. By July 1942, the statistics told a story that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Merchant ship losses had dropped to 47 for the month. U-boat losses had climbed to 23. For the first time in the war, the Germans were losing more submarines than the Allies were losing merchant ships. The balance had shifted. The Battle of the Atlantic was turning. Donitz issued new orders. All U-boats were to minimize radio transmissions. Messages should be as short as possible, preferably under 5 seconds. Transmit only when absolutely necessary. Use predetermined code phrases that could be sent in 2 or 3 seconds. The orders helped, but not enough. Even 3-second transmissions were enough for Huff-Duff to get a bearing. With multiple escort ships covering a convoy, triangulation still worked. The Wolfpack tactic that had been so successful was now a liability. Coordinating multiple submarines required multiple transmissions. Each transmission gave away another position. The escorts would race to intercept, and the U-boats would scatter, abandoning the attack. Coordinated assaults became impossible. The wolf packs dissolved into individual boats, making desperate, uncoordinated attacks that rarely succeeded. Tommy and Sarah continued their work through the summer of 1942. They detected dozens of transmissions, helped coordinate dozens of attacks. Some U-boats escaped. Some were damaged. Some were destroyed. Every success meant merchant ships that survived. Every success meant cargo that reached Britain. Every success meant the people on that island could hold out for another day, another week, another month. The work was exhausting. 4 hours on watch, 4 hours off, around the clock, in all weather. Tommy's hearing began to suffer from the constant headphone use. Sarah developed migraine headaches from staring at the oscilloscope in the dark. But they kept going because they knew the alternative. They remembered the convoys before Huff-Duff, when ships died every night and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Commander Hartley wrote in his private journal on July 31st, 1942, "For the first time since this war began, I believe we can win the Battle of the Atlantic. The U-boats are retreating. The merchant ships are getting through. Britain will survive. And it is all because of two things: brave men willing to face danger, and a brilliant piece of technology that turns radio waves into targets." The secret of Huff-Duff remained tightly held. The Germans suspected something, but they never confirmed what it was. They continued to transmit because they had no choice. And the Huff-Duff network continued to find them, continued to guide the escorts to their positions, continued to turn the Atlantic from a German hunting ground into an Allied killing field. The autumn wind cut across the North Atlantic with knife-edge cold. October 1942 brought storms that tossed even the largest ships like toys in a bathtub. But the convoys kept sailing because Britain needed food and fuel, and the war would not wait for good weather. Convoy SC 107 pushed through the gray water. 34 merchant ships carrying tanks, aircraft parts, ammunition, and hope. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Weber stood on the conning tower of U-553, salt spray stinging his face. His submarine had finally been repaired and returned to combat. But everything had changed since his last patrol. The orders from Admiral Donitz were strict. Minimal radio transmissions. Maximum radio silence. Only transmit when absolutely necessary, and then for no more than 3 seconds. Weber knew why. The Wolfpack he was part of had started with 7 U-boats. In the past 3 months, 5 of them had been destroyed. Only U-553 and U-628 remained. They were supposed to intercept Convoy SC-107, but coordinating without radio contact was nearly impossible. They were reduced to making educated guesses about where the convoy would be, hoping to stumble across it by chance. "Contact," the lookout called. Smoke on the horizon, bearing 090. Weber raised his binoculars. There, barely visible through the mist and spray, was the dark smudge of smoke from multiple ships. The convoy. His hands tightened on the binoculars. This could be his last chance to strike a meaningful blow. The U-boat war was lost. He knew that now. But individual commanders could still make a difference. Individual attacks could still succeed. "Prepare to transmit position report," Weber ordered. 3 seconds maximum. In the radio room of HMS Wanderer, Tommy Fletcher sat at the Huff-Duff console. He was exhausted. This convoy had been under attack for 2 days. The Wolfpack was persistent, probing the escort screen, looking for weaknesses. So far, the Huff-Duff network had detected every U-boat that transmitted and had guided the escorts to drive them off. No ships had been lost yet, but everyone knew the next attack was coming. Sarah Chun reviewed the chart, marking the positions of all known U-boat contacts. 7 separate submarines had been detected over the past 48 hours. 2 had been sunk. 3 had been damaged and forced to retreat. 2 were still out there somewhere, silent and dangerous. The radio crackled. A burst of German Morse code, so brief It was almost lost in the static. Tommy's hand moved instantly, locking the direction finder. Contact. Bearing 085 degrees. Transmission duration 2.8 seconds. Sarah was already on the telephone to the other escorts. HMS Achates reported the same transmission, bearing 142 degrees. HMS Vanessa got 118 degrees. 3 bearings from 3 ships. Sarah plotted them on the chart. All 3 lines intersected at a single point, 14 miles northeast of the convoy. Target confirmed. Sarah reported to Commander Hartley on the bridge. U-boat position marked. High confidence. Hartley did not hesitate. He had learned to trust the Huff-Duff operators completely over the past 6 months. All escorts, commence attack run. Achates and Vanessa, coordinate from your positions. We're going to catch this one. 3 escort destroyers raced toward the calculated position. U-553 had crash-dived as soon as the transmission ended, but Weber knew something was wrong. The escorts were coming too fast, too directly. They knew where he was. Somehow they always knew. Silent running, Weber ordered. Maximum depth. All ahead slow. The submarine crept through the dark water, trying to be as quiet as possible. The crew stood frozen at their stations, breathing slowly, trying not to make any sound that might be detected. The first depth charges came 5 minutes later. They were close, but not close enough. The ocean erupted with massive explosions that shook the submarine, but did not breach the hull. More charges followed. The escorts were dropping them in a careful pattern, boxing in the area where U-553 was hiding. Weber ordered evasive maneuvers, trying to slip out of the trap, but every time he changed course, more charges fell. The British were coordinating perfectly, talking to each other by radio, adjusting their attack based on every movement U-553 made that a charge exploded directly above the submarine. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in dim red light. Water sprayed from a cracked pipe. The depth gauge spun wildly. The submarine was losing depth control. Surface. Emergency surface. Weber shouted. They could not stay down. The damage was too severe. If they did not surface now, they would sink to the bottom and never come back up. U-553 blew its ballast tanks and clawed its way back to the surface. The submarine broke through the waves like a wounded whale. The conning tower hatch opened and Weber climbed out, knowing what he would see. 3 British destroyers surrounded his submarine, their guns pointed directly at him. There was no escape, no way to fight, no way to dive again with the damage they had taken. Weber looked at his crew emerging from the hatches, their faces showing exhaustion and relief. They had survived. That would have to be enough. Stop engines, Weber ordered. Prepare to abandon ship. The German crew lined the deck with their hands raised. The British destroyers moved closer, wary of tricks, but there were no tricks left to play. HMS Wanderer pulled alongside and lowered boats to take the survivors aboard. Weber was the last to leave his submarine, watching as the seacocks were opened and U-553 began to sink. His boat, his command, his war died on the deck of HMS Wanderer. Weber stood wrapped in a blanket, a prisoner now. Tommy Fletcher approached him, curious to see the enemy face to face. They were about the same age, Tommy realized. Just 2 young men caught up in forces larger than themselves. How'd you find us so quickly? Weber asked in careful English. Every time we transmit, you are there within minutes. We could not understand it. Tommy wanted to answer. Part of him thought Weber deserved to know how he had been beaten, but the orders about secrecy were absolute. Huff-Duff remained classified at the highest level. I cannot tell you that, Tommy said, but the war is over for you. You survived. That counts for something. Weber nodded slowly. Many of my friends did not survive. Good men, brave men. They died not understanding what killed them. Good men on both sides, Tommy said. That is the tragedy of war. The convoy sailed on. Not a single merchant ship was lost. U-628, the last remaining submarine from the Wolf Pack, detected the sinking of U-553 and made the decision to retreat. The attack was over. The convoy would reach Britain safely. Commander Hartley stood on the bridge as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The gray Atlantic looked almost peaceful in the golden light. He had just received a message from headquarters. In September 1942, 63 U-boats were destroyed. In October, the number was expected to be even higher. Merchant ship losses had dropped to their lowest level since the war began. The Battle of the Atlantic was not over. It would continue for years yet. But the critical moment had passed. The U-boats could no longer stop the convoys. The supplies would get through. Britain would survive. And eventually, the accumulated weight of American industrial power and British determination would crush the Third Reich. Sarah Chun updated her notebook with the final statistics from Convoy SC-107. 8 U-boat contacts detected, 2 destroyed, 3 damaged and forced to retreat, 3 driven off without making successful attacks, 0 merchant ships lost, 0 escort ships lost. The mission was a complete success. "We did it," she said to Tommy. "We did," Tommy agreed. But he was thinking about the young German sailors they had pulled from the water. Most of them were younger than him. They looked cold and scared and grateful to be alive. The enemy, but also just young men who wanted to go home. The war would continue for years. Tommy and Sarah would serve on convoy duty through 1943 and 1944. They would detect hundreds more U-boat transmissions. They would help sink dozens more submarines. The work would become routine, almost boring, except for the knowledge that every detection saved merchant sailors from drowning in burning oil. The secret of Huff-Duff remained closely guarded until after the war ended in 1945. When the technology was finally revealed, the Germans were shocked. They had suspected some kind of detection system, but they never confirmed it, never understood exactly how it worked. The simplicity of the concept surprised them. Radio signals travel in straight lines. 2 bearings make a cross. Where the lines intersect, there is the target. High-frequency direction finding changed the Battle of the Atlantic. It did not win the war by itself. Radar helped. Aircraft helped. Code breaking helped. Industrial production helped. But Huff-Duff was the technology that turned the tide at the critical moment when Britain was closest to starvation and surrender. Admiral Donitz wrote in his memoirs after the war, "The enemy's efficient use of direction-finding equipment was one of the main factors in our defeat in the Atlantic. We never fully understood the extent of their capability until it was too late." Tommy Fletcher and Sarah Chun received medals for their service. The citations were vague, citing only exceptional dedication to duty in convoy operations. The real story remained classified for decades. But they knew what they had accomplished. They had helped save Britain. They had helped win the war. And they had done it by listening carefully to radio static and doing the mathematics correctly. The last peaceful convoy crossed the Atlantic in November 1945, 6 months after Germany surrendered. No U-boats hunted in those waters anymore. The radio waves carried only peaceful transmissions. Merchant ships sailed without fear. Tommy stood on the deck of a transport ship carrying him home and thought about all the convoys, all the ships saved, all the men who lived because of the work done in that small room with the green glow of the oscilloscope. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The invisible had become visible. The hunters had become the hunted. And technology, combined with human courage and determination, had changed the course of history.